So just to catch Brian up a little bit, Ed and I have talked about this, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to follow the TWIT model this week in tech. Not that I'm a twit.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been a long fan of Leo's.
Yeah, so they have this live sessions where you get to see everything. You get to see the cameras. You get to see the conversations between him and the crew and everything, and then and so people can tune into that live and enjoy that whatever you want to call it, experience.
The raw feel.
The raw feel, which I absolutely love. I actually like it more than the post-produced material. But then they take the post-produced material and they chop it down into manageable segments, and they put nice graphics to it and audio and all that kind of stuff, and then they publish those out as well. So you can get the you can get the full meal deal, or you can just get the sides. And so anyway, we're going to start going to that. So starting this show, we're going to go to that format. So basically, it's just going to be a live show that people can come and hang out and be here as part of it and watch it live. And then we're going to chop everything down. So that means that we probably in our shows won't have an hour show, right? We'll publish the hour show as it is, but we'll also take the segments and chop them down, which means that they'll, instead of being 30-minute segments, hopefully they'll be 10, 15, 20-minute segments. So we're going to work on that. It's going to be it's going to evolve over time. I'm going to try to work out the conference rooms here. I'm going to try to work out sound and audio and all those types of things. I know Mike, who's joining us right now, has said that he likes the backdrop that with the app icons and all that kind of stuff like that. So we're going to try to I'll try to bring that here and put it behind me, and two, we'll try to update it maybe because it's several years old, so we need to update it with some of the fresh icons and things like that have happened since then. So. Hey, Sergey, thanks for joining us. I think that's you. It doesn't have an icon on it. It's a little scary.
It does say Sergey, though, so we're going to trust that it's him.
Right.
It could never be anybody else.
Yeah, we'll hope. Let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to close. I have all these instant messenger things open. I'm going to close 6 or 7 of those. He says, it's me, but I can't talk. Okay. I hope that's for technical reasons.
So much for life in the gulag.
What's what?
So much for life in the gulag.
Yeah. All right. Ed, are you near being ready?
I'm ready. I'm just playing the game here.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start it up. I'm probably going to do too much talking today just because there's a lot of room echo, and I don't know how that's coming through for you guys, but I do have some announcements, so we'll start off with those.
I suppose I should bring my camera back up, huh?
You can if you like, yeah. So I'm not going to do an intro today in the interest of, like I said, just doing the post-production thing later. We'll just, everybody who shows up to this live thing knows who we are, right? So let's just go through. I will introduce you guys, though. Joining us is Dr. Brian Burton down in Abilene.
Hello.
You can find lots of great material over at burtonsmediagroup.com. Also joining us is Ed Marina. Hey, Ed. You can find all his great stuff at roaminggamer.com. And then we have Mike Hempfling from cravecreative.com. And also joining us is Sergey Lurg from Laser. It's been so long since.
I say Laser Dog, but that's not it.
No, I didn't want to say Laser Dog. That's not it. Yeah. I will put a link in the show notes. Sorry, Sergey.
Studio. There you go.
Spiral Code Studio. Thank you. I was like,
It's a new room.
You know what throws me off is he has a laser game, and I always associate that laser game first, and then the name of the studio, and that's wrong. Clearly.
Laser puzzle.
Likely story. Hey, Mike, just so you know, your camera is not coming through again. I don't know if you just got it on no camera, but that's what we're seeing here. I'm seeing.
Yeah, the same thing here.
Do you see the camera now? I had had it on at first, and I wasn't sure if anybody could see.
No, now we just got black.
Yeah, it's not coming through.
That is just so weird that...
Mike's in a no camera zone. We have this problem when we meet on Skype, too.
Yeah.
I'm in a blackout zone.
Sorry.
Probably
So
the government.
Sergey has no voice. Mike has no picture.
Get the three monkeys out there.
I have no home.
You said, oh, I said it. Darn it. That's right. So what are we talking about today?
Hey, so yeah, let's get into it. First of all, I want to make some announcements. One is that the fan plugin, not the Corona Geek fan plugin, but the Facebook Audience Network plugin, was released last Friday, actually. And if you're not familiar with it, basically it is a plugin that allows you to be able to integrate Facebook ads into your apps. So if you're not familiar with Facebook ads, they have a high eCPM, which means good money for developers. Also, it has high fill rates. So if you've got a good size inventory, a lot of opportunity to show ads, then Facebook has the ability to fill those opportunities. And so that's important, because if you can have really high eCPMs, but then if your ads don't get shown, or their ads don't get shown, then you don't get credit for it, you don't make money, right? So this is actually that actually kind of ties into the next topic we're going to talk about briefly, is that Apple i ads are going away. Apple has announced that they are going to stop supporting those as of June 30th. They're going to pull that down, and they've actually had some low fill rate issues as well. So this fan plugin is a much better opportunity for developers to make money off of their apps. So go check out the blog post. It includes links to the documentation, to the source code. There's a project that you can pull down and see how the thing works. And I'm going to create a video that's going to talk about some of the nuances of working with the Facebook Audience Network. But for now, you can go check out the blog post and read everything there. We'll also check the show notes. We're going to put in a link for the Apple iAd removal. So look for that. But it will basically require you to update your apps. You're going to have to remove iAds from your applications. And that's Apple's put the deadline on that for June 30th. So look for more.
Which also, Charles, leads us perfectly into the Corona Ads tool that's forthcoming, which is going into beta this next month.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's going to be a perfect tool to replace. So don't get in too big of a hurry if you're using iAds.
Right.
To republish your app, and to do that, we're going to be able to use the Corona Ads, and then you can select which ad networks you're going to use through the Corona Ads, and it'll be an easy replacement.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. So ultimately our goal is to have a spectrum of monetization options for you, and you can pick the one that you want, or you can pick none at all. You can, if you don't want to put ads in your app, that's fine. If you want to do in-app purchases and no ads, that's fine. If you want to use any one of these ad networks, it's ad plugins, you can do that. So we do want to leave that option up to you, and you can figure out what's best for you and your audience. But yeah, like you said, there is going to be a blog post coming out this week that's talking about some more of the plugins that we're working on. Corona Ads is definitely one of them. We're going to try to push that out to the beta testers by the end of January, with a broader release coming in February. So look for that. If you haven't already, I'll put a link in the show notes, but you can go sign up for the beta tester program if you're interested in checking out the Corona Ads before they release to the general public. And yeah, that's all I got to say about that. Look for the blog post, like I said, coming up more about plugins later in the week. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to Kangman Wan, who is in Korea, and he has shared a couple of interesting GitHub projects with community. One is called Corona Man, and the other one is called Corona Space. Space is basically like a space shooter, where you can actually the more aliens you shoot, the more points you get, and then you can trade the points in for different styles of ships, different capabilities, different looks. The other one is Corona Man, which is a kind of a, I don't know if you guys ever saw the cookie clickers, you know, the games which you just tap, you just continually tap them, and each time you tap them you get points, and then you take those points and you can level up to the next level. And anyway, he has shared these with us, and he's got some great graphics. Have option screens. You can turn sound on and off. Lots of great little, it's a great starter set. So we'll link to that in the show notes. I've already shared those on social media as well. So if you're just listening to this, you can go find it over on social media, either on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, wherever, just put /Corona Geek and you can find us. Okay, that's all the announcements that I have for today. I want to keep it short. Does anybody on the panel have anything they want to share?
Oh, I am working on updates to the Corona books, especially the textbooks. They're in use by a lot of high schools and universities and colleges around the world. So I try to update these every few months, and I will be including the Corona ads in the next major release after I've had a little bit of time to work with it and figure out the best way to teach it.
Awesome. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, and then as far as my announcements,
yeah,
I can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Last month I've released 2 new games, Poppy Droppy, which is just a fun endless runner type game, very simple. And also just end of last week I released Killer Bubbles, which is kind of similar to what Ed's doing, just not as crazy and cool. But it's a more simple version of the top-down shooter game, and then the third announcement was I was able to port over my Flappy Fruit Bat, which is kind of the the Flappy style game of when it came out during that big phase, to the Apple TV, and it was accepted last week, and now it's live on their Apple TV store.
You're fired. Making me. Hey, last time we talked, I said, "Here's Mike. He does all this stuff. He's always doing stuff." And sure enough, boom, 1, 2, 3, there he's done. Makes me feel.
That's what happens if you never stop working, and if you don't have a life and you never stop working, then.
Okay, I'm gonna try that for a while.
Yeah.
Never stop working. No sleep required.
Ed, I used to think that I had a whole month to get things done. But now I realize that I only have 4 weeks. Time is compressing the older I get.
Time is speeding up.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so as Ed takes his drink of water, we've been covering a series here on twin-stick shooters. It's on the heels of the last series that we finished, which was... we included game controller support right at the end, but with this twin stick shooter, we have decided to add support directly from the beginning. The whole focus of the game revolving around controller support. So continuing with that, we are going to look at some things today, like HUDs and other things. So Ed, what exactly do you have planned for us today?
All right. Well, first of all, we're very close to being completed here. This game is now capable of supporting both mobile and desktop out of the box, although I did realize as I prepped moments before the show that I forgot to put the bomb button in the mobile version. So you can steer and fire in the mobile version as it is now. Actually, it's the same version. You build it for mobile, it automatically detects it's on mobile, and it does the virtual joysticks and all the other good stuff. If you build it for desktop or you run it in the simulator, it assumes that you're doing desktop version, and that all works. So we have bombs, which is the thing we were missing last week. Like I said, the mobile version does not have the bomb button. We have a difficulty increment, and the way it works is basically it gets harder every time period, which is set to, let me just check here, wrong editor. Difficulty, so yeah, currently I've got it set to get harder once per second. So every second you're alive, it gets a little bit harder. And then when you die, that resets. So we talked about that last week, but it wasn't in yet. The things that I want to talk about today are, last week you will recall, let me turn it on so you can see here. Let's show the spawning grid. There's a couple of things we did last week. I showed you guys this spawning grid business where you can see the green and the red, which was a trick that I used for determining where and when I can spawn enemies. And another feature that I talked about last week.
We're still seeing your camera.
Oh, still seeing my camera. Well, I can see it. You guys, come on now. This is what happened. I got two desktops and I still don't have enough camera. I don't have enough going on here. Let's try that again. Okay, so last week, after I changed all that code, and you guys didn't get to see it, but that's cool, I showed you this. And so you can see that we got some red regions and some green regions. And what these represent is that spawning is not allowed to occur in the red regions, but enemies can be spawned in the green regions. And what this is kind of like a trick, a very easy method for determining where to put things or where you're allowed to put things. And I'm gonna show you a breakdown of this code today in a tighter example. So along with what Charles was saying at the beginning of the show is what I'm going to try to do from now on is give a full game like we're doing here, but I may break down the individual pieces in a separate smaller example so people can get their heads around it. So what I'll show you today is a single piece of code that demonstrates the same principle, but doesn't do exactly everything the game does. However, when you get in here and look at the game code, then you'll say, ah, that's the piece that Ed was talking about, the sensor code, and now I can see how it works. Because if I show you some of these things in situ within the game, it may be a little bit hard to follow. Along those lines, another thing I showed last week that I want to demonstrate today is a trick with HUDs. So what we've got up here is we've got two images. We've got an image for the ship and we've got an image for the bombs. But what I've done is I've created a scaling effect, a scaling and a filling effect, where this is actually one image, but it shows three entries. Same thing with this one. So I'll walk through that. And then I think that's probably going to be about what we've got. But if not, I really wanted to show an example that is not related to the game, because I've been seeing a lot of questions about this. And it's called shuffle bags, and it's a method for getting random numbers in a more deterministic and useful fashion. So why don't I just shoot right in here? Oh, actually, let me show this off briefly, since I've got my camera up here. I'm using Air Server to cast my iPad, and if you played this today, you would see something like this. And it's got two virtual joysticks, a left and a right. And this code has been added to the project, so you can just dig right in there and see how it works. But I don't know, I'm pretty pleased with this. This is the first game I've ever done with Corona that automatically detects the environment it's in and changes up the input scheme. So this is a new one for me, and hopefully for the folks that are following along. Let me go ahead and quit that and then bring up our first example. Let's start with the HUD trick. So again, the HUD trick is basically a way of presenting images as HUDs, heads-up displays, or counters and such, but using a single image to represent a quantity equal to 0 or more. Now the way this example works, before I look at the code, is when you first run it, it's going to show a bunch of different HUD examples. And each of these is a counter. This one is aligned to the center, this one is aligned to the right, aligned to the left, and then this is a different HUD, which we'll talk about in a minute. But as you run this, if you click on the screen, what it does is it increments each of these HUD entries by 1. So now each one represents 2, 3, 4, etc. And then eventually when you get, I think it's to 6 or 5, yeah, when you get to 6, it sets it back to 0, and then you can click through it 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see how these things behave. And I did this so that as we talk through the code, it will make a little more sense. So let me get these things out of here. And let's bring up the editor. Now, a link will come with the show notes today, and the first of these that we're going to be looking at is the HUD trick. And the way the HUD trick works is...
Hey, Ed, can I stop you real quick and just have a real quick question?
Sure.
Would this also work with sprites?
That is a... I think so. You know, sure. Ask me a question that I haven't investigated. I think it would work. Let me think about this for a minute. The only part that I worry about here is that we're using texture wrapping. So I'm not sure how texture wrapping affects sprites when they play. But assuming that there's not a bug in there or some kind of hidden feature that I'm unaware of, this should work. So in theory, you could have HUDs that are both animated and single object, but could visually behave as if they are multiple objects. So let's start this over again. I'm going to walk through the code so you can see what's going on here. In this example, let me full screen it. You're going to see two functions. You're going to see one called new HUD, and a little bit further down, you're going to see another one called new HUD2. Very creative names. The distinction is that these first three examples are created with new HUD, and this fourth one is new HUD2. And the difference is a lot of times what you'll see in games is that they will expand the HUD, say like for 3 lives or 4 lives, but then when they get to a certain number, then they'll ramp it back down to 1 image and then with a numeric counter. Because what you don't want is, you don't want somebody who's like a high-scoring player to expand their lives HUD all the way off the screen. I mean, you could do that. Like back in the days when we played arcade games, really good arcade players would have that problem where their lives would flow off the screen. And I don't think that the people who made those games really thought that anybody would get scores quite that high or life counts that high. But if you're trying to create a modern game, you might want to consider the case where somebody overflows your counter to the extent that it starts to interfere with other elements that are on the screen. For example, if we go back to our game, and we just pause this for a minute, what we don't want is we don't want this lives counter to flow all the way over here and then to obstruct our visibility or ability to read the score counter. And likewise, if we had something over here and we don't want the bomb counter to flow over. So ideally what we would do is we would display a certain number of each of these, and then when it gets to a value greater than our limit, it would collapse back to 1 and we'd have a numeric counter. So we still get the information we need, but we're not wasting space and we're not overlapping other elements in our display. So the way we achieve this is very simple. It's incredibly simple. First thing we do is we set the default wrapping mode for X. So we have the texture wrapping for X and Y. And the only one we care about is the horizontal wrapping. So we set texture wrap X to repeat. And the reason we do this is that Corona uses OpenGL, or a GL variant. And we need to set the rendering state before we create our object. Then we need to create our object. And then we want to reset our state later for any other objects that come after. So in essence, what's happening here is when we create this display object, it's going to get the attributes that are set up as the default. And one of those default values is texture wrapping repeat. We've just set it, and so from then on, this specific display object will remember that it is set up to do repeating, whereas anything created after this statement will be back to clamp to edge. So if I had left this and just left it as repeat, every other display object I created after this would have wrapping set for repeat, which is not necessarily what we want. So again, set the state, then we create a single object, a rectangle, and then we use the filling technique where we say fill is equal to, and then a table where the type is image, and we give the file name as smiley. And let me see if I can show you this image here. So it's in HUD trick, and we just have an image, a little smiley image. and then we reset the state. And then below here, I added a variable called value. I could have called it anything I wanted, but as long as it doesn't conflict with existing fields on the display object, we're good to go. So value is equal to 1. I'm assuming that a counter will start at 1. I mean, this is for people who are looking at this, they could modify this later and give it like a default value. So something tricky like that. Now they can say create new HUD at this position and say start at 3, and then our value would start at 3. But for simplicity's sake, this example will start at 1. The only other thing we do here is I attach a method to the HUD called setValue, and it takes an argument self and an argument value. And then when we do this, when we call this function or this method, it will update the value to whatever we've passed in. It will do a small check, and it will say if the value is equal to 0, basically hide the HUD, don't show it at all. However, in any other case, if it's assuming that the person doesn't pass in a negative value, which would be an error for this, I don't have any error checking in this code. So I try to make it as simple as possible. Assuming that you pass in a numeric value greater than 0, it will show itself. It will set the X scale to be that value. And then what we will do is a little trick here. So one of the things that goes on is when you initially set wrapping, let me show you what happens here so this makes more sense. When you initially set wrapping, everything is appropriately scaled. However, if I scale the object and do not adjust the fill scale, I get this weird stretching, which is not what I want. So there's two things going on. We need to scale the object, which is make it twice as wide. In fact, let me show you. Let me make a small change here. So this is a little more apparent. I'm going to put a stroke around the object. You can see the outer border. Now we can see the outside border. So when I click here, this is going to scale. Now the object is twice as wide as it was before. So the X scale is set to 2, which is the current value. However, it's stretching. It's doing something weird. And the reason is fill values. So we set up a fill value here. They have this property where you can scale the fill value to whatever you want. And if you want to retain the original aspect ratio of this fill, the fill scaling has to be the inverse, where is it, of the scale. So what I'm saying here is, if we scale it to be twice as wide, the fill has to be 1/2. If we scale it to be 3 times as wide, the scale of the fill has to be 1/3. So this is kind of a strange concept at first. How do I express this better? Other than to tell you that it is a fact, I'm not sure how to express this. I think for people who are watching this is simply go into the code on line 43 and do what I did just a moment ago. Go ahead and comment that out and then run it and then scale it, increment it a few times, and you can see what's going on here. These things are getting more and more horizontally stretched, which is what we do. We want it to look horizontally stretched, but we want the fill to be appropriately sized. And to do that, mathematically, is we just need to scale it by the inverse of the object scale. I don't know how else to say that.
That's okay. So knowing that this is a fact is important. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So I'm still adjusting to the new format here.
But how did you come to understand this problem and then find a solution for it?
How did I come to? I came to understand this problem by already understanding this problem. How did I learn it the first time? The first time I learned it in a textbook when I was reading about scaling and textures and OpenGL.
Okay, so this is just a general OpenGL scaling issue then.
Yeah, it's more fundamental than that. We can forget about OpenGL. If you think about it, if you had a stretchy piece of rubber or something like that, like a balloon, and it had a face on it, and you stretched that thing out horizontally, the face would get wider, right? It would no longer have retained its original aspect ratio. So if you wanted to retain the original aspect ratio, you'd have to do some kind of math to change that. And so when I say aspect ratio, what I'm talking about is the ratio of the width to the height, or the height to the width, depending on how you want to think about aspect ratios. So if I make it twice as wide, and I want to retain the visual aspect ratio of the same width versus height, I need to divide by the width. So I make the object wider, but then when I fill it, the fill content is 1 over the width.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those fundamental things where you do it and you say, if you're learning this sort of like organically, without a textbook, you're just plugging along trying to figure things out. This is one of those things where you would suddenly discover, aha, now I see, now I understand how the fill ratio works with respect to the actual scale.
Okay,
so I could modify. Go ahead.
Well, then just in the context of Corona, how where did you begin to look to say, oh, well, I've run into this problem before, I understand this issue, let me find the way to deal with it in Corona?
Well, honestly, okay, so originally I knew when I scaled something with a fill that had a fixed fill scale, and then it stretched, I remembered immediately, yes, I have to scale the fill. And then I remembered that there was an article, let me see if I can find it here, there was a great article by Rob on scaling, and I think you can simply find this by typing in Corona SDK.
Yeah, my point in asking all that is just, so that people can kind of work this out for themselves when they run into these kind of issues later on.
Yeah, so I typed in the words Corona SDK, and I think you just type in fill, and up came Repeating Fills, an article that I believe Rob wrote, which is a great article on fills and how they work, and he talked about this exact problem too, with texture wrapping, and then a little bit further down, scaling the fill. And so he probably did a little more succinct job of describing what's going on here. But if you look at the article, it's going to talk both about horizontal and vertical scaling relative to the fill scale and how those two affect each other. So.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So those two things, a little bit of knowledge and then knowing where to look. And it's worth noting here that if you can't find it by searching through the blogs manually, Google it. Corona SDK, topic, whatever word it is you think best represents the concept, until you get a hit back, because you will get a hit back. So what's left? There's one other minor tweak. I'm going to take this bit of code out here and show you what happens. So let's say you've gotten this far. You've got the fill scale and you've got the horizontal scaling of the object. You got that working. But then you notice, oh, what is going on here? It's now supposed to represent 2, but it's like offset. And then it's not offset. And then it is offset. Again, this is one of those things where I kind of just knew as soon as I saw it. I didn't remember it at first, but then I saw it and I said, oh yeah, that's right. And what's going on here is the way the scaling or the filling works in Corona is it doesn't adjust to the relative scale of the object, it makes perfect sense. So what you need to do is you need to look at the value. Is it 1 or 2 or 3? Is it even or odd? And in the case where it is even, you need to adjust the fill x position by 1/2. And what that means is fill x can go between 0 and 1, and probably 0 and -1, but I don't do that. And what that does is it basically adjusts the starting point of the fill. So let me show you what would happen if I manually adjusted it, so this makes a little more sense. I'm gonna manually adjust it to some increment. We'll run it a couple of times here. So it starts off by default at 0. So everything looks right. However, if I change this to 0.1, so a little bit to the right, I think, a little bit to the left. Of course, it's going to be the opposite of whatever I say. Now it's a little bit offset. Then I can do 0.2, run it again, a little bit more offset. So what this is telling Corona is fill with this texture, but slide it over a little bit. So let's try minus 0.2 to see what happens. Should slide it over to the right. Yeah. Now the fill slides a little bit to the right. It's repeating, but it isn't perfectly centered. What you're in essence telling Corona is change how this is centered on the axis that you're repeating on. Now back to the original problem. The original problem is that we want to show one texture or one stretched texture, and then we want to show 2 and 3 and so on and so forth to represent our numeric value in the HUD. But the thing that happens here is that on odd values, it's offset incorrectly. Or I'm sorry, on even values, it's offset incorrectly. And so, knowing that there are only even and odd offsets here that we care about, I simply say if the scale modulo 2 is equal to 0, in other words, it's a multiple of 0, set the fill scale to 1/2. Slide it over halfway. So half the width of one texture. Otherwise, it's an odd number, 1, 3, 5, etc., and set it back to 0. And as soon as we do that, we fix our, it would stop if we would save our file. As soon as we do that, everything looks correct. So again, this is correct, but if I don't adjust the starting position, the start of the fill, then we get this little weirdity here, which might be cool. This might be fine. In fact, some HUDs, depending on how you're doing this, I wanted mine as discrete images, but maybe you've got like a pattern, and that's all you really want, then this might work perfectly well. So it's really dependent upon what you need. But in my case, I wanted a discrete image to represent one life or one bomb, and so I want to slide this over or not slide it over, depending on if it's even or odd. And so just put this little bit of code in here, and easy peasy lemon squeezy. That got no smile. I was trying for a smile out of Charles, but okay. So let's talk about.
I was so focused.
Shoot me.
I'm so focused.
Okay. That's good. All right. Well, we're almost done with this topic, and then we can move on to maybe a little more interesting one. Or at least a different kind of mental exercise. The second HUD you're seeing here, I talked about this already. So what I want is I want a HUD that visually represents the count to a certain point. So in this case, I want it to go up to 3, and then after that, I want it to show a numeric value and then just the icon representing my lives or whatever I'm using. And so I've used basically the same code. So I copied new HUD, and then I made a couple of more changes. So let's see. We did the texture wrapping. I created the image. I reset the texture wrapping. I set the value. And then I have this new parameter called limit. So if we look up here, you can see that limit is a value we can pass in. And for the one on the screen, I believe I set the limit to 4. Let me check down here. No, I set it to 3. Okay. So we'll look at the logic and see what that means. So the limit is 3 in this case, and so I'm storing that in the HUD so I can refer to it later. Now here's a new piece of code. So what we've done is I have created a label, and again, this is a very limited example. So you get what I give you, but you could expand this later or change the code to change the size of the text, the relative positioning, the font that is used, but I'm just using all the basics. So what I've done is I've created a new display object, a text object. I store that in a field called label on the HUD. I give it an initial text value of 1. I position it at the X and Y value initially, the same ones that are passed in. We use native system font and size 32. Now I know that initially I don't want to show this, so I set the visibility to 0 or false, that is. And then I know that I need to slide this over because I positioned it at X, and that's not correct. If I took this out and I ran this, it's probably a little bit hard to see here, but right here, the counter is right on top of the display object. Really what I want is I want it to the left of the display object. So I do that simply by saying HUD label X is equal to, make it real big here, is equal to the current position of this HUD, a HUD.x, minus the content width of that HUD divided by 2 minus 5, and then I change the anchor for the label to be the right side. So in other words, helps if you save your code. In other words, that code says start here, subtract half the width of this object, and then add 5 more, or take 5 more pixels off and push it more to the left, and then say, okay, now align this object by the right edge, which is anchor x equals 1. Or I could have also done, I could have put it off to the right, and the simplest way to do that is I could simply say a HUD x plus half the width plus 5 pixels, and then anchor 0, which is the left side of the object. So if I saved it, I did. Click, click, click. Now our counter is going to be on the right side. So either way, however you want it. I'll leave this code in here when I commit this. Again, there'll be a link with the show notes for people to read this. All right, so now we've got a counter, a label, a text label that is representing our counter. It's currently not visible because we assume that we're going to be showing initially just the visual element, the graphic element. And let's take a look at our set value. Okay, so set value now is we set the value to the current value passed in. We update the label text to be whatever that value is. And then we do some checks. We say if self value is equal to 0, then we hide both. I'm sorry. That's probably. I'm going to say that is false. Okay, that's true. This is what happened. All right. So we set the label to visible, and we sell. No, this can't be right. Sorry. Here we go. That's what I want. In fact, these others are not behaving correctly. No, that's right, because they have no counter. Okay, sorry, backing up. This is what happens when you lose your mind in the middle of a show. So what do we want? This is a superior HUD in the sense that it can also express 0. Now, really, these are lives counters for me. I was using these in the game as lives counters, and when you get to 0, who cares? You're dead, and the game's over. So I didn't need to show it at that point, so I didn't add the ability to show the concept of 0. I just hit it and called it even. However, perhaps you have a counter where you would like to express that you have 0 mines left or 0 widgets or whatever it is. In that case, you need to show the counter. So our first check is if value is 0, show make sure that both the counter and the graphic are visible, because we're going to show the graphic and then we want to show that 0 is the value of how many we have left. However, the next step is to check to see if it's greater than our limit. So our limit for this one was 3. In the case that it is greater than the limit, we do the scaling just like we did before, except we have a simplified version because we know we're going to be showing only 1, and we know that 1 is offset by 0 and has a scale of 1. So I could just plug 1 in for each of these. Then we make sure to show the graphic and we show the label, and we get this here. So we get a number and we get the value. However, if it's not 0 and it is less than or equal to the limit, we wish to show just the graphic. And then we do the same thing we did in our prior one. So we hide the label, which we didn't have before. We show the graphic. and then we do our little scaling algorithm. Now this is a little bit shorter because I took the comments out, but if you are confused, just go up here and look at the steps, because these are exactly the same steps. X scale is equal to value, scale X is 1 over the HUD's X scale, and so on and so forth. And that is basically it. So the value of this is that now we've only got one display object that we need to maintain and clean up. And we don't, a lot of people, they approach this problem the first time and they say, okay, I want to have a graphic to display the number of lives. And so for every life they have, they create a new display image. But then they have this problem where they need to go back and clean those images up. They got to remember where they're positioned. It's just a pain in the neck. But with Corona's fill option here, easy peasy. You just use one display object, you scale it, and you fill it, and you're done. And I think that would be
Nice.
the end, unless anybody has any questions.
Nice. Yeah, the only other thought that I have is if you could take that 5 and make it like almost like a notification, like a little dot on top of the other graphic. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, never mind.
No, it's okay. It's like you like smaller in positioning, or?
Oh yeah, now I'm just going. This is a great example. First of all, I think the concepts here are valuable, and then and my mind always just jumps to the next thing, and I'm like, ooh, what if you just overlaid that number on top of the object itself, right? So you've got bombs. Let's just say the little faces that represent bombs. You got bombs, and then on that bomb you have like just a little number that's right up on. I'm not asking you to do it because that'll derail everything. But
if I could do it quickly, but yeah, you could certainly do that. Yeah, absolutely. What I'm showing here is the start, but you could take what I've given you here and easily adjust this so that the positioning of this is a little bit different, the size of it is different, colors, etc.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mostly what I was interested in with this example was getting people started on the concept of the fill scale and the scaling, so they could see that they get this savings. Because I've helped people in the forums a number of times, and back then, at one point, we didn't have filling back in Graphics 1.0, and so I showed them discrete images as the way to go. So multiple discrete images in a display group, and it was always confusing because people had trouble sort of like remembering which one's left of which one and how to remember to just remove it, or it was a little bit difficult. But this, I think, is a little bit simpler. You only got one object to deal with, and you just got to remember how to scale it and fill it, and you're good to go. Okay. So let's talk about, let's flip a coin. Do you guys want to talk about sensors, or do you want to talk about shuffle bags? Sensors are related to the game. Shuffle bags are another topic. Not game related.
Personally, I'm interested in shuffle bags.
All right, shuffle bags it is. Actually, shuffle bags I find it to be a very cool topic. So what is a shuffle bag? Let me get my code up here.
It's fun to say.
So, shuffle bags are a technique for dealing with random numbers. So let's talk about random numbers. When you're playing a game, let's pretend we're making a card game, and we have in our card game a jack, an ace, a king, and a queen. And we want to present the user with 4 cards, but we want to give them to them in some arbitrary order, but we want to include one of each card. So what I would like to have done when I click this red button is that you get an ace, jack, king, or queen in some arbitrary order. So if I were trying to do this with random numbers, I might do it like this. I might create a table that has a list, basically, of the 4 cards: jack, king, queen, ace. And then, down here where I'm drawing the cards, I would randomly select between 1 and the number of cards, which is 4, and pull one of the cards out of the list. So, in other words, select a random number, 1 to 4, use that as the index in the cards, grab the image name, store that here, and then create the card. However, if we run this and we click on the red button, few times, what we're going to see is we're not getting what I want. What I want is one of each card. Instead, I'm getting ace, queen, jack, jack, which is wrong. Preferably, what I would get is each in some random order. So how do we solve this? The easiest way to solve this is to create what's called a shuffle bag. Now, a shuffle bag is a construct where if you what's the game with the letter tiles?
Scrabble?
Scrabble, right. So if you've ever played Scrabble, you've used the physical representation of a shuffle bag. The game of Scrabble has a fixed number of letter tiles. It's always going to have the same number of each letter in all the tiles. So it could have like 3 E's and 4 O's and 2 N's, and there's some kind of random mix, but it's fixed. You get your bag of tiles, and the number of tiles and the number of types of tiles never changes. So what you would like to do is be able to represent that same concept virtually. So in the real game, you reach into the bag. Well, you put all the tiles in the bag, you shake it up. Now they are in some random order. And then you reach in and you take a tile out. And you know when you do this that if there are 3 E's in the bag, you will never get 4 E's when you reach in and pull out tiles. If you get 3 E's, you know you're out of E's. So we do this virtually by creating a mechanism called a shuffle bag. And a shuffle bag is really nothing for Corona. It's nothing more than a table where we can put some entries in, shuffle the table, and then provide a function that allows you to say, give me the next value in the bag. So in our example here, what we're going to do is we're going to put 4 cards into the bag, and then we're going to pull them out one by one. And if we look at main Lua for this example, you will see an example called bag. Go ahead, shoot.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm assuming then if the algorithm picks a card that already exists, it'll go back around the horn again and try to get another one.
Actually, it's a little bit simpler than that. So what you're talking about is a great approach, okay? So what Charles has said here is said basically, in fact, that's a great intro. So let's back up a minute here. So let's pretend that we have 4 entries. One way we could solve this problem is to create another table and every time we select a card, we put it in let's say file equals file, just to make this easier for me to code up. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select a name of a card out of our cards list, our card table, and as soon as we get one, we're going to put it in here, and we're going to put it in our table in text by the name because we know they're unique. So what we'll get here eventually is we'll have like selected king equals king, and pretend I put PNG on there. The point here is eventually what this table will contain is a reference to each of the 4 cards. So Charles was saying is at this point what we can do is actually this is wrong. All right, live typing. See, Charles, you just can't talk in these shows because then I'm going to try to do it, and it's going to be all very confusing.
That's my job.
Okay, so here's what I've done. Hopefully this runs and doesn't crash. Let's look at the logic briefly. Select a card randomly. We'll get back a string, jack, king, queen, or ace, .png. Immediately go into a loop that says, if that already exists in our selected table, try again. So if we've already selected the ace, select another card. And we keep doing that until this comes back as false or empty. And then immediately what we do is we say selected file is equal to file. And this will totally work. This solves the problem. Charles has solved. You've made it completely unnecessary for me to do this. And
I would like to point out that, if I can interject something, that this would only work if you have unique individual items. If you have, in your Scrabble idea where you have, or in this card game where you have multiple aces, or the Scrabble where you have 3 E's, that doing it this way I don't think would work, would it? Because
you've stolen my thunder.
oh, okay.
It would not exactly work this way. You could still force it to work. In fact, this is exactly. This is why I call this the naive approach. This is not. I'm not pointing at Charles and saying naive. What I am saying is naive is not meant as an insult. What this is meant as is as people approach this problem the first time, they go through these natural steps. They go, okay, this didn't work. How can I make that work? I could look to see if I selected the card. Okay, now it works. No, it doesn't work because I wanted to have 2 E's. How could I do that? I could do a thing where I put the E in a table and then I look at the table. Yeah, that'll work. And eventually they get these like really complicated, naive approaches that work, but are, one, as you said, didn't work initially. This solution doesn't work for duplicate values. You could still make it work. Then the next step is to add variation to make that work, but we still run into another problem. Because this is a naive approach that is not at all efficient, imagine, if you will, you had 1,000 values in your 1,000 unique values, and you were using this approach. You could get into a scenario where you're trying to pick the 1,000th card out of your thing. You know, it's unique. You've got 999. You just want to get that last one. This loop may never end. In theory, it could never end because it could randomly keep selecting 1 through 999, never get the 1,000. Should have selected a value I could say out loud. The 1,000th one. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Am I being clear?
Yeah.
So the
you're
more
just
of these you have,
you'd be randomly.
Go, Charles.
Go ahead. Well, you'd be randomly picking these up, going, nope, that's not it. Nope.
Yeah, you get into this loop where you're like, okay, I already got that one. I already got that one. I already got that one. And this gets just worse and worse the more values you've got to choose from. So it works. And for 4 cards, you wouldn't notice. But here, let's do this.
Yeah, it doesn't scale.
I want to demonstrate this. I know we're running out of time, but the other parts are pretty easy, so hold on. Equals 0. And then we'll just say count equals count plus 1. And do it in the loop here too. And then we'll print out count. Okay, so ideally, we'd get a count of 4, right? But in reality, even for 4 cards, we can find it here. Here's our doohickey. Where is it? I've lost it. There it is. It took us 7 tries to get 4 cards. Let me just push this off to the side. Uh-oh, I think I've crashed it. Yep. And then as soon as you introduce a coding error in your code, it goes on forever. It goes on because I didn't clear selected. Great example. I'm so glad you brought that up, because there you go. That's exactly what happens. Naive approach crashes your program. But it only does it arbitrarily at some future date when you thought it was working. Not in the middle of the show. Or perhaps in the middle of the show. And, of course, it happens in such a way where you don't have your code in an easy place to pick it up. All right, there it is. So, back in business. 9 count. 14 tries. 13 tries. Clearly inefficient, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so what we want is we want to always get exactly the right amount, and we want to get it the first time. I want to randomly select it one time and get a card that I know for sure is not a repeat. It's one of the cards I put in my shuffle bag. And so the way that works, very quickly, is I have included a new module here, which you can just use right out of the box without even understanding how it works. But how it works is in bag 1, which is hooked up to this green button here, you say local shuffle bag require shuffle bag, which will load the module and return a reference to it. And then we say shuffle bag new, and there's 2 ways of using it. You can just pass in your list of elements, and what this does is it creates a shuffle bag and it puts 4 cards in there. Now this is one way. Bag 2 below, the example, will show you a different way. And then you say, the first time you fill it up, you say shuffle. So initially when you put them in, they're in the order Jack, King, Queen, and Ace. And if I were to pull them out, I would get Jack, King, Queen, and Ace in exactly that order, which is not what I want. So we tell the bag to shuffle it, to shuffle itself, and then we use it pretty similarly to the way we used our previous piece of code. We just say in a loop, cards, get, and it will return Jack, King, Queen, or Ace. And now I know that there's a question lingering there as soon as I say what. Well, you're thinking, what happens when I get the 5th card? When I put 4 cards in, what if I call get 5 times? We'll get there. But the point is that the way this works internally is it keeps a list in a smart way, and it knows that it's already given you the Jack and the Ace and the Queen, and the only card left here is the King, or Jack, Queen, Ace. Oh, I'm sure I get the exact same. King, Ace, Jack, Queen. Okay, so to answer the question, what happens if you pull 5 cards, is shown in bag 2 example. Here we say shuffle bag require shuffle bag, and we create a blank shuffle bag. So we just say shuffle bag new. It doesn't have anything in it. And then I insert the 4 cards. So this is the alternate way of adding content. And you can pass in anything. You can pass in a string, you can pass in a table, you can pass in a reference to a display object. It's a universal container. It doesn't care what you put in it. You can put in some strings and some other things, however you want to use this. Content is content. It's just going to give you things out of the bag, has no idea what they are, it doesn't care. We've inserted our cards, so we do a shuffle. And then this one, when I push the button, the blue button, it'll pick out 4 cards and a 5th card. And what you're going to see is exactly what should happen. The shuffle bag will always, in the first 4, return randomly sorted Jack, King, Ace, and Queen in some order, and you won't get a repeat. But as soon as you go beyond the edge of the bag, the shuffle bag class or module has the ability to say, oh, I ran out of cards. They're asking me for more cards. I'm not going to return nil. So then it takes the bag and it refills it with all the cards that were previously in it, shuffles it up automatically, and then gives you the next randomly sorted card. So you're going to see, if we call this 8 times, we would get some Jack, King, Queen, Ace, and then we'd get 4 more random cards, but each one would only repeat 1 time. So we'd have 2 aces, 2 kings, 2 jacks, and 2 queens. And then when we got to the 9th selection, we might have 1 more of each, and so on and so forth. So not only does this return exactly the cards that are in the bag, and you don't get repeats, but it's also smart enough to maintain the ratio. So if you have a bag with 4 cards and you call it 400 times, you're going to get 100 of each card. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Charles's eyeballs are moving. I'm focused on Charles's camera here, so I get to see what Charles is thinking.
Yep. I was actually thinking that this smacks a lot of data structures, which is a class that computer science students take. And,
it is actually, the shuffle bag is nothing more than the implementation of a basic data structure.
Yeah.
It's Charles. You're just saying all the right things today. Now I know that we're out of time, but let me just iterate over how this works for people. If you go open the shuffle bag module, you're going to see that it's a module like always. So I say local shuffle bag in a table. And then I have a function here whose job it is to take a table and randomize it. And it's used internally. But then we start to attach functions, or I create functions that are going to be attached to individual shuffle bags. So I have an insert function that takes argument self and object. So you can say insert and some object, a string or something like that, which is here. And then we have the shuffle function, and that basically says shuffle the contents of the bag. And we have a get function, which returns the next value out of the bag until the bag is empty, and then assuming that the bag is empty, if the bag is found to be empty, it will refill the bag and automatically shuffle it. And then we have finally shuffle bag new, which takes an arbitrary number of arguments, or none if you wish. And the way it works is it creates a table called bag. It creates two subtables, one called used, which is the cards that have already, or the objects that have already been selected from the bag, and another one called unused, which is the current contents of the bag. And then we attach our functions, which were created above. So we attach insert, shuffle, and get. And then if anything was passed in, we automatically call the insert function on each of those arguments, and it returns the bag. And that is it. This is it's a very simple piece of code, very short, only about 90 lines. And I think that if people just dig through here, I would ignore initially this function, but you'll see that each of these is very simple. For example, insert says, look at the unused bag, how many objects are in it, take that count plus 1 and add the object to that position. So it's a numerically indexed table. So every time you add something, it's put it at position 1, put it at position 2, so on and so forth. Shuffling is, let's see. Okay, yeah, so when you shuffle, it's got a little safety feature here. First it says, if you're shuffling, I assume that you want to shuffle the entire contents of the bag. So the first thing it does is it says, are there any cards in the unused bag? Did you already select some cards out? And if you did, put them back in the bag first. So it goes through the unused bag, and if there's anything there, it puts them back into the used bag. And then it calls the shuffle table function on that and clears the used bag. So it starts off with a fresh used bag. And at that point, the cards are all in the unused bag, and they are in some random order. And then finally, get. Get is fairly simple. It checks to see if there is nothing in the used bag and nothing in the unused bag, in which case you have not added anything yet. It's a safety feature. And so that's the only time when it will return nil. In other words, you never put anything in the bag, I have nothing to give you. But assuming that you have put something in the bag, the next thing it's going to do is say, is the unused bag filled? In other words, maybe you put something in, but you took them all out already. So you already called get on the fourth card. There are no cards left. Shuffle. And because shuffle has this little safety feature, it says, oh, take all the unused objects and put them back into the used bag and shuffle that around. So now we have never put anything in, have already taken everything out, but assuming that neither of these pieces trips, we simply select the next value out of the used bag, the unused bag, put it in the used bag, because now we're going to give it away, clear it, and then return it. So just in a nutshell, you create a table inside of this structure, you fill it up with objects, you randomize that table. At that point, you never randomize the order again until the next time you shuffle. And then you just start picking out the first element. Give me the first or the last. What do? I do the last. So pick out the last object. So pick out object 4. Pick out object 3. Pick out object 1. I'm all done. So if I try to pick again, fill the bag up, shuffle it again, pick out object 4, pick out object 3, and so on and so forth. That is basically it. So how can I summarize this for folks? If you're creating a game where you need to create a random sequence, but you want that sequence to contain a certain number of elements, a fixed number of each element, the best way to do it is with a shuffle bag. Also, if you want to ensure that you get a random sequence and you do not get repeats until you've run out of elements within your sequence, a shuffle bag is the way to go. I think that's it.
Very well said. All right. Well, thank you very much. I think that's good. I vaguely remember seeing something like this. I can't remember the name of the developer, but he did a card shuffling, a poker kind of card shuffling algorithm, and I have not been able to find that because I think he took it down or whatever, and so having something like this in your toolbox is a good thing. So go ahead and download the code. We'll have it in the show notes. And then you can always revert to it later. You might not have a need for it now, but you might later, and it's good to have. And I think the concepts are general enough that even if the SDK changes later, you'd still be able to look at the code and figure out what's going on and just reapply it to whatever you're trying to do. So
I think so.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I want to remind everybody that this is for people who are watching this recorded video later, that we are going to be changing our format here on the show. We're going to go a little more behind the scenes, rough, raw sort of format. I probably will start introing the shows just as I did before, but what we're going to do is we're not going to worry about so much making it one smooth show, right, where it's a produced show here. This is going to be the live part. Which means we're going to have starts and stops and technical bits and behind-the-scene issues and stuff like that. And then when I go to clean everything up for the clips, then we'll put nice, pretty graphics on everything and stuff like that. So everybody is welcome to come Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific to hang out here and talk and ask questions and do things, and then we'll chop that up and put it out as nice, pretty little clips after it's all over. So I think it's an evolving process. We're gonna work on it. We're also gonna start doing some. Yeah, it's a little bit of a.
Get better at that.
Yeah, we're moving into a new space here. We're trying to mix up the format a little bit, and I think what that'll do is if we just jump right into the show, we can even experiment with putting announcements and stuff. Like I can put in announcements and stuff later. I don't know. We can kind of experiment with that. That way, when you guys show up, we can talk just about the nuts and bolts of things, and then I can always spend the time to attach things later. Does that make sense? That way, we'll just have more raw time to talk. Okay. All right. Well, I am going to close it out and say thank you for being here. We'll be back here next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific. Look for some backdrop there. I will try to bring that in and get it all set up, and we'll have a little more of a studio here. Maybe cut out some of the room echo. And I was trying to get some visual interest on the street, but that doesn't work lighting-wise. So anyway, we'll be back here next Monday to talk all about Corona SDK. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.